Alright, welcome back to Simple Stats for STEM. This is the second video on creating histograms to show some normality of our data. In an earlier video, I created this histogram for the sleep data that we've collected, and actually for this scenario we've made it up, but it's data that could be collected from individuals, and I've created a histogram and the normal curve to show how this collected data compares to what would be normal data. And so the collected data here falls underneath the normal curve, which is good. We'd really like to see that average right here in the center, reaching up here to the top, and the data falling, cascading down side to side. But this at least gives us an idea of where the normal data would fall, and that allows us to continue forward with our analysis. So I'm going to go ahead and do that histogram for these GPA values now. And so to do that, we're going to use this frequency formula, and I explained this a little bit more in the first video, but basically this takes these GPA values right here and breaks them up into bins or bars and tells us how many of these pieces of data fit into these various bars of the histogram. It tells us the frequency count of our data. So I could do that individually one by one, go through and count them and say, okay, there's 2 here, there's 4 here, there's 7 in this bar, or I can have Google Sheets do that for me. So let's use this formula here of frequency, and so I'll type in equals frequency, and I'll select the frequency distribution of array formula. And all I have to do then is highlight my data in that range and hit the comma, and then it's going to ask me for classes, which is these groups or bars or bins. And so I'm just going to highlight this section of bars here, and I've broken this up into even values, 1, 1.5, going up by a half each time, 2, 2.5. So these are evenly spaced out. And so I'll close those parentheses, and there Google Sheets has broken up that data into these frequencies for me. So within the range of 1 to 1.5, there's 1 value. 1.5 to 2, there's 2. 2 to 2.5, there's 4, etc. So this tells me these pieces of data, how many of them there are within these bars. So that's good information. And if I went ahead and started creating my histogram, and on this video I'm gonna kind of let this build as we go along, so we can see how various things contribute to the graph as we're doing it. But this would go ahead and put those values in somewhat where I want them, and we can see that the data here is a little bit skewed. To the right, we know the mean of this data is about 2.91. So ideally, we'd like to see the top of the curve right here above this 3. So it's a little off to the side, or it's kind of heading this direction. So that'll be something to kind of keep in mind. I'm going to go ahead and do a couple things here. I'm going to use this row 19 bars GPA histogram. I'm going to use row 19 as headers, and that will go ahead and put, in a minute, it'll put a legend on here for me, or at least it should. And we will, let's see what this does right here. It's not anything I want to, so I'm going to continue going here with creating the normal curve, and then getting everything on the graph. And by the way, I want a combo chart, not just a column chart. And so I've got that, I've got my data range, and I should be good to continue going here. I'll put some labels and things on here in just a minute. Okay, so let's continue. We need to create the normal distribution, and we're going to use a formula to do that. And again, I did this earlier. It's the norm dist formula. And what that does is it uses a formula to tell us what the normal values should be if this were a normal set of data. And so norm dist, and I'll select the normal distribution function. It wants to know what value to put in there. I'm going to use these bar values. These are evenly spaced, so that's going to make my curve nice and evenly spaced. And then I'm going to choose that 1 there, a comma, and it's asking for the mean of this data set. I know it to be 2.91. I've calculated that. I'm going to use F4, and that will lock in these values so they don't change each time I drag this formula down. You can also just insert the dollar signs there. It wants the standard deviation. I've already calculated that. That's here. F4 to lock that. And then I'm going to type the word false because I do not want this to be a cumulative normal distribution. Close the parentheses, and that will give me the normal distribution value based on that bar. I'm going to drag that down, and now this gives me the functional values for the normal distribution of the data set with that mean and with that standard deviation. Obviously, these values are not on the same scale as these GPA histogram values. So as I did on the first histogram, I'm going to scale these to get them on a little bit similar plane with these collected values. And the way I'm going to do that is simply, I'm going to take this cell here and I'm going to multiply it by the number of data points I have, which is 20. I have 20 pieces of data here. And so I'm going to tell Google Sheets to take this cell. Let me do Shift 8 for an asterisk. Let me tell it to multiply it by 20. And then I'll just drag that down and it will fill in those values for me. So these values are what a normal set of data with this mean of 2.91 and this standard deviation of 0.20 having 20 pieces of data, how they should be collected. So this at least gets them on a little bit of a similar scale. I've got these match up pretty good. These obviously do not. So when we go to these, do pretty close. So when we put the normal distribution on here, it's going to make a nice curve over this. So let's see how this turns out. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this graph. It's already a combo chart. I need to include more data though, so I want to add a series. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this series here, include that in my graph, and you'll see that that pops in there. And now I've got my legend up here, which is nice since I have two sets of data. It's going to go ahead and tell me which is which. So that is because I included the labels on these columns in my data. So G19, J19, and then I did G19 as well. It asked me earlier if I wanted to include row 19 as headers, so that's why these are showing up here. So that's an important detail. Okay, let's smooth this line out. We'll go over here to custom, and on chart style we want to smooth it. So there's the normal curve appearing nicely above my collected data there. And let's go ahead and put a couple labels on here. So I will go down through here. I'll put a title on my chart. We'll call this GPA histogram, and I'll bold that, make that nice and pretty. Then I'm going to label my horizontal axis. We call that GPA, and I can bold that. And then I'm going to create a vertical axis title, and I will call that frequency. And I really need to go back to my my other histogram here and change this right here because this is not accurate. This should say frequency as well. Let's see what else on my series. I'm going to include the data labels that tells me the frequencies. The reason that did that is because I didn't tell it which one to do. So I don't want to apply to all series. I want to just apply it to the GPA histogram, and I'll include the data labels on just those. So this tells me the number of pieces of data I have in here. So for people who have a 2.5 GPA, there are 4 of them. There's one of them here. There are 7 GPAs that go between 3 and 3.5, and so that puts that value on there for me nicely. And let's see, on the legend, I'm pretty good to go there. My GPA histogram and normal curve, those are labeled pretty good. I'm fine with those. And so there's many other places you can play with these things and get them to do different things, but that is the basics there of creating another histogram. So now I have a normal curve for my sleep data, and I have a normal curve and histogram for my GPA data. So now I'm in the process of showing the normality of my data so that I can continue on with the analysis of it in the next couple of videos. So that's how we create a histogram.